Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This being, of course, the Concealed Carry Podcast. And here we are yet again, doing a live podcast. What more could I say? It's a podcast. And we do these things live. Twice a week.
Yeah, we're buying time. So some people jump in here.
Oh, hey. Yeah. I see 5 people watching.
Terrific.
No comments yet. First comment wins $1 million. Just kidding.
Here,
Just kidding. Wish I had $1 million to give away, because that would mean I have more than $1 million for myself.
Tony and Bobby.
Tony wins the $1 million. Congratulations, Tony. Just kidding. Hello, Bobby, Everest, Mark, Cammy. Welcome. Gary, now they're coming in. Bam, 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 bam. Rapid fire. 20%. I'm a millionaire. You are a virtual millionaire, Tony. You know, I'll send you a message with $1 million virtual bucks. How about that?
Actually, we're all kind of like virtual. Like nobody really has physical. I mean, you might have physical money on you, but all your savings and stuff is all virtual, pretty much, right?
That's a fair point.
I haven't seen the
fair.
money I have in my savings.
Yeah.
I assume I can get it, but who knows? Right?
Well, there's something to be said about, having at least some cash on hand, a good chunk. It's probably not a bad idea to have a couple months worth of, living expenses on hand in some form. So, yeah. Anyway.
But that's not the topic.
No, it's not the topic. Today is a legislative news episode. Plus, we will be featuring the Shooter Ready Challenge from this month, the May Shooter Ready Challenge. So, shooterreadychallenge.com is where you can find that, by the way, if you want to go check out this month's challenge and the video that goes along with that. And if you want to participate, you have a chance to win some free ammo, 200 rounds of 9mm, free from Ammo Supply Warehouse. So, speaking of which, that missed the show notes, Matthew, so we got to make sure we recognize all sponsors of Shooter Ready Challenge. Today's podcast brought to you by the state of Colorado. Well, that is, yes, it's actually a 511 shirt. Colorado proud, although politically makes me not so proud at times, because we got a story today from Colorado that is,
yucky.
It's actually not surprising to me. We'll analyze that, of course, but because I think honestly that particular legal challenge was a long shot. But there's other things in process, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, well, everybody, welcome. Mark, 200 rounds. That's half hour at the range. Yes, and according to today's prices, like $60 worth of ammo. So be happy with that. Oh man, it's scary sometimes when I actually go to the range and train, man, and I look at the pile of brass on the ground. I'm like, I know what that costs. Speaking of brass, I just reloaded a bunch this last week, so I'm working on building up the stockpile for lesser money than what it would be costing me otherwise.
That's wise.
All right, well, let's kick off the recorded portion of the show, guys. As you know, we publish the podcast to any of your typical podcast feeds that you might be familiar with: iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. I love the fact we're on Spotify, by the way, because I use Spotify for like everything these days, anyway. And so, check out the podcast. If you miss the live episodes, really not a big deal. Make sure you're subscribed on iTunes. Google Play or Spotify or TuneIn or Podcast Addict or there's all kinds of different apps, right? And various sites. So check it out. Today, of course, legislative news episode. Boy, can't get the words out. Not that that's anything new. That's pretty much par for the course for me. But it'll be a good one, guys. So stay tuned. Let's do it. Matthew, give us a countdown.
3, 2, 1.
That's your best one yet.
Yeah, I'm getting better.
This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 418. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman, and I'm joined by our co-host and producer extraordinaire, awesome dude, Matthew Maruster.
Hello,
Graybeard.
Hello.
Not Graybeard actual, though, just to be clear. He's not, he's not that little guy.
I'm the poser.
Some folks will... Maybe if you're in the know, you're in the know. Actually, I hope to get Matt Little on the podcast someday. We'll see. Who is the actual Graybeard actual? That's a funny thing to say. Okay, so today's podcast is a legislative news episode. Super excited to get into the stories today because this stuff's important, and we do our best to bring the latest legislative news and happenings in the industry. Of course, we cover things from across the country. We cover some specific state issues as well that are particularly relevant. We sometimes do like a 50-state roundup sort of thing. We called that something reload or something. I think we came up with some term. As you can tell, we're super organized here at the Concealed Carry Podcast. But, the interesting thing with this whole COVID-19 thing, Matthew, and I'm sure you're well aware of this or that you've noticed as you're digging for stories, because Matthew's the one, by the way, that puts together and collects all these stories for us, is that with COVID-19, there's not as much happening on the state levels, it seems, with regards to gun-related legislation.
Right. There's a lot of proposed stuff and people trying to slip stuff in, like executive order wise. But as far as like legislative hearings, there's really not much going on.
Yeah. So I mean, it's relatively quiet, and that makes it challenging sometimes to find content to talk about in our legislative episode. But today is not going to be a letdown at all. We've got a number of great stories we'll be talking about, so stay tuned. But today's episode is sponsored and brought to you by first the Laser X dry fire training software from Laser App, the Laser App folks. You can check it out at laserapp.com. That is LASR, just so you know. I fear that people confuse it and put it, they hear our links or something and try to go to laserapp.com or something and totally mess it up. But check out the Laser X version of the software. It works on any internet-connected mobile or computer device. I use it all the time on my phone or tablet, both Apple devices. And it used to be that you could only run the Laser software on a Windows machine. So super excited about the Laser X program, and it has been valuable in dry fire practice and training. Also, today's episode brought to you by Next Level Training's CERT training pistols. We would encourage you to check those out and pick one up if you haven't already, or if you need another model, such as the newer P320 models they have available. In fact, they have a full-size and compact P320 based training model. And then also they've got the M&P models still, the Glock models, and the pocket pistol model, which is very closely sized to a Glock 43, Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, or even the P365. It doesn't follow any of those specific shapes or forms, but it's close enough to any of those that it would be valuable for someone looking for dry fire laser training with a compact, very, very small, micro compact size gun. Check out the CERT pistols. Go to concealedcarry.com. You can see the full lineup in our store there. We're proud partners of the Next Level Training team. And for a direct link, you can also go to concealedcarry.com/CERT, SIRT. And then finally, we recognize as a sponsor, AmmoSupplyWarehouse.com. That's my choice, my place I go to when I'm purchasing ammo, especially online. Of course, things have been harder to find in recent weeks and months since COVID-19 began, but I would encourage you to still check out AmmoSupplyWarehouse.com. They get new inventory in almost every day, and they're really, really great guys. They ship super, super fast. Speaking of which, Matthew, all three of those companies are involved with a special project that we have called Shooter Ready Challenge.
Yes, sir.
And do you know what this month's Shooter Ready Challenge is?
I happen to know.
Why don't you spill the beans, sir?
So Shooter Ready Challenge this month is going to be talking about natural point of aim, how to establish it and why it's kind of important in instinctive shooting. So yeah, it's a pretty cool little video and tests that you run or drills that you're running this week.
Yeah. So here's the thing. People talk a lot about natural point of aim, and I think that can mean a lot of things. All right, because like the classic way of teaching it is that a person will have a natural point of aim of some sort, and that you should try to identify what that is, and then try to train around that. And that used to be how I think, how I thought about it. And I do think there's a lot there that still plays into what we're going to discuss here, but I think that also natural point of aim can be trained and probably should be trained. And what I mean by that is, let's just suppose, Matthew, that I do a natural point of aim exercise with you, and I have you stand there as a student and draw and present to a target. And, we make some adjustments and realize that, well, for you to really, like your natural point of aim is such that you've got to like duck your head down low or something crazy so you can find your sights. Well, that seems kind of odd and strange to me. And that's one way I've seen this sort of thing be taught. I think that we want to work with what our body naturally is inclined to do, but then we feed into that some training objectives, and by that I mean that we're going to go through certain drills and perform certain repetitions to help us train the body and the mind to work with our natural point of aim and also refine it and make it make it very applicable to how we run a gun. So this month's Shoot Ready Challenge, by the way, was to Matthew's point, kind of builds on that idea, on that concept, and we use just a simple draw and put one round on target, drill, which is it's one of the very basic, one of the basic challenges in the challenges package or whatever challenges pack I think they call it in the Laser X software. Whether you do it from the concealed inside waistband holster, or there's also a secondary option. You could do it from an outside waistband holster. Now, I demonstrate it in the video this month from OWB, which is fine, just because I wanted to mix it up for myself personally. But basically, the idea is that I do some dry reps of just draw and get my sights on target, and just kind of get warmed up and get used to that idea, and then we kind of throw a little wrench into the plans, Matthew. And what was that wrench?
Yeah, so you're shooting with your eyes closed to confirm that or test that natural point of aim.
Right. So those of you that will participate in the Shoot Ready Challenge this month, we then this month's drill is basically drawing and putting one round on target, but then doing it eyes closed. And we do a bunch of repetitions. And we go through it, doing it slowly and trying to be more accuracy focused, and then we do it fast, right? Which I like how that progression happens, because you can get to a point where you can close your eyes and draw pretty consistently and get somewhere on that target, but then we start throwing speed at it again, like we start picking up that speed, and then things will sometimes break down. And so that's a great opportunity to go, okay, all right, each time you do this, here's the idea, and this is the key to doing this whole drawing and getting the sights up on target with your eyes closed. Here's what's really important, is that every time you do it, you want to get up on target with your eyes are closed, of course. You drew from the holster, eyes closed. You get on target, at least where you think the target is, and then you want to open the eyes, and then you want to see where you are in relation. Both, I want to pay attention. Here's a couple things, and I don't know if I explained this as well as I could have in the video, but I want to pay attention to where my eye line is in relation to my sights. Is there any adjustment that I need to make there? Right? So like if my sights are below my eye line, then I want to make the adjustment necessary to bring that up, right? And then each time you're making these adjustments, you want to be paying attention to what it feels like. You really got to kind of get in touch with your feelings with doing this kind of drill, because you need to pay attention to your body and where it's located. Now, that actually has a word that describes that: body awareness. Can you say that fancy word, Matthew?
body awareness, or are you talking about proprioception?
Proprioception, yes, that's pretty much what it is. Is proprioception is being aware of your body, its position, and movements and stuff in your body.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and high level athletes and performers have a high proprioception level because they have to be very aware. Think about a gymnast, right? You know that is gonna, I don't know, do the uneven bars, right? And where they're flipping over the bars and jumping between bar and back and forth and doing all that amazing stuff. And then at the very end, they dismount, right? And they land, and of course they're supposed to land and make this beautiful pose or whatever, and to do all that and all that twisting and flipping and tumbling and rolling around and all that stuff, like you have to have such amazing proprioception to know where you are, what your body's doing, what you need, little adjustments you got to make along the way. And so we're kind of talking about things on that level that it will help your shooting tremendously if you increase your ability to as far as the proprioception, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this drill is designed to help with that. That we close the eyes, focus more on what we feel and what we perceive with our body and its positioning, draw to the target, open the eyes, get some feedback, see where we are, make slight adjustments. In the video, I talk about how I made some adjustments with my stance, side to side, and stuff like that. And then the second piece is that by doing this a bunch of times, again and again and again and again and again, and just doing a lot of dry fire reps, period, are going to help build myelination, which is more commonly referred to, and incorrectly, I might add, but commonly referred to as muscle memory. And so recently I was actually doing some studying on myelination, Matthew, and it's really, really, I mean, like you can go so deep into that, into the science of what the process of myelination, the building of myelin, which are these little sheaths that build themselves onto these axons, onto these brain cells and these pathways. And it's sort of like, and actually something I read recently is without myelin, the signals that your brain sends across these synapses and everything, they kind of more or less hop along, and they're not very efficient. But as we build myelin, it sort of insulates those pathways, and so then it's pure efficiency, just phew. And that's how we get to where it's those things that we do we don't have to think about, right? When you've done something so many times, well, you've built up the myelin necessary to just the signal and the operation happens so quickly, so efficiently, that it's basically operating subconsciously. And that's where I hope to be, and that's where I hope to encourage others. Many of you following us, listening to us, viewing these podcasts and our videos, I want you all to get to a point where the operation of the gun is a subconscious thing, because it frees up cognitive space, bandwidth to focus on the fight at hand, to focus on decision making, right? You're going to be much more inclined to fail at making appropriate decisions in a stressful environment when you have to be thinking about what you're doing with stuff that should be subconscious. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys, I mean, you mentioned you can get really deep into this, but I talked to Jason Speller, and I know you've interviewed him a bunch of times and stuff, from draw school, and he made the barrel block, so he does that, but which we talk about a lot. But he that draw school, all that curriculum is based upon using your body's the way it naturally works, and stop fighting against it to do things that cause you to think and have to perform, but do things that your body naturally wants to do. And that way you're more efficient in your movements, and there's less cognitive, things that you have to think about, just like you said. Mm-hmm. So if you guys want more, if you want to dive into it more, look up some of the interviews with him, or look at Draw School, because it's really, really good stuff.
Yeah. Yep. So anyway, I think it's really helpful to understand how this kind of stuff works, because then at least for a person like me, this may not be true of everybody, but knowing how my body works helps me understand why it's important to do the things that I do. Whether that's with, dry fire practice is so important. Getting the repetitions in is so important because it takes literally thousands of repetitions of things, of tasks, to get to where they start becoming automatic and subconscious. And just understanding, how that all builds up, and that, while those myelinated pathways can be broken, and you can, stop doing things and lose some of that, there is some science that suggests that a lot of those pathways still remain. That myelin remains and allows you to rebuild that back up relatively quickly. It's not a guaranteed thing, but it can be that way. So anyway, that just shows you how important the practice and the training and the dry fire and all of that is. It really, really is key if you want to operate at a high level, performance-wise. So that's basically the Shoot Ready Challenge this month. I know that we got all sciencey on you and stuff and used big fancy words, but I think the drill's a fun one, and I enjoy doing it. Just drawing, closing the eyes, doing my best to put an accurate shot on target, seeing what the result is, and get that feedback loop going right with yourself as you're training and as you're practicing. Okay, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What's the adjustment I got to make? And make little adjustments, because you make big ones, it's a lot harder to figure things out.
Sure.
So there you go. ShooterReadyChallenge.com is where you can find it. Check it out. And of course, participants in Shoot Ready Challenge that participate in the actual challenges in the LaserX software are automatically entered into a monthly drawing for 200 rounds of free ammunition from AmmoSupplyWarehouse.com. And we also thank Next Level Training for being a part of the effort and a sponsor of this Shoot Ready Challenge.
Yes, sir.
All right, Matthew, what's our first story in the legislative news?
Yeah, this is a good one, so I'm glad I got to bring this one, because normally I'm bringing all the bad stuff, right? Like all these laws and stuff. But this is good. It comes out of Oklahoma. Title is Oklahoma Passes the Country's First Anti-Red Flag Gun Law. So we're constantly hearing state after state introducing red flag gun laws, extreme risk gun TROs, basically. And so this is actually the opposite, and it's pretty cool. So just in synopsis, this is the first state to pass such a law that says that individual jurisdictions cannot actually pass red flag gun laws. So it preempts all that stuff, and so it says, hey, you can't do it. And they passed it with an 8-2 vote, which is pretty cool. So this is really good as far as kind of stopping that trend.
It has been a trend. We see, every year now in legislative sessions, more and more states add red flag laws to the books, as they are commonly called. Extreme risk protection orders, high risk protection orders, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously the big concern here is the protection of Second Amendment rights, and they should be taken very seriously. And depending on the state you're in, and the level of quality, and the effort that's put into crafting, if we dare say, in quotes, good law, it might be reasonably a decent red flag law. It's hard to say this. Or it might be a really, really, really bad one. And by and large, a lot of these are unneeded, and a lot of them are not written very well, or at least have all kinds of ways they can be abused. I mean, the funny thing is we passed it here in Colorado, and instantly there's been several instances now of people filing false red flag laws, where because you have to be within a certain category of individuals to be able to be eligible to file one of these against a particular individual, and people are trying to do that left and right, and the ones we hear about, the ones we know about that don't go anywhere, are the ones because the people have no claim in the matter. There was a police officer that had a red flag order filed against him. This was in northern Colorado by the mother of a person that he had to shoot in a justified use of force incident that was reviewed and was found. I mean, you had an armed individual that the cop, there was no other option. The cop had to shoot him, and that individual died. And that individual's mother then tried to, through a very, I'm not going to go into details. I think we actually did talk about it too. She tried to file a red flag order against the cop. Now, it eventually got thrown out. But the point is, some stuff is gonna sneak through, and then also in a case where you actually have a family member that actually is one of those categories that can file one of these things, it pretty much is that they are the ones that get believed first. Because proactively, the order gets filed, cops show up, take your guns into they confiscate your guns, basically, stick them in a storage locker somewhere, an evidence locker, and then 3 weeks later you get to go before a judge. It's pretty much how it goes. So anyway, I'm really glad to see Oklahoma passing the country's first anti-red flag gun law. This article on Vice.com has the appearance of being written pretty well, but it's a bit of a joke too, because it's definitely biased. It's definitely slanted. Yeah. It presents, the way it reads, I mean, it definitely presents the Okay, hold on. Am I back?
Yep, you're back. I thought it was me, but I think you cut off for a second.
Weird. How come the audio's not coming back through my headphones though? Stand by, guys. Need to figure out what happened here and why it happened.
So while Riley's fixing that, I'll just let you guys know in the article what Riley's talking about, how it's kind of slanted. It talks about the purpose of red flag laws, and it talks about obviously it talks about Parkland and says this shooter displayed red flag signs, but the police couldn't do anything, and these laws or laws like this would have given the police the ability to act when they wouldn't have before, which is bogus. It's not true, and we all know that there's laws on the books. You can't make terroristic threats against people that you're capable of carrying out. If you're a danger to self or others, every state has laws on the books that if you're a danger to yourself or other legitimately, then you can be taken into custody for a period of time to be evaluated and things like that. And at that time, firearms can be seized in certain situations. So there are ways that the firearms could have been seized from the Parkland shooter, even without red flag laws. The problem with that incident was they didn't act on any of those indicators. They anything. So that wasn't that they didn't have any legal justification to do anything. They just didn't. And so, but that's sort of how the article tees up the debate.
Yep, you got it. Thanks for covering for me.
Yeah.
I don't know what suddenly happened with the mic setup here and my headphones, but I lost all my audio from my headphones, and I have to listen through the actual computer now. Cool. Hopefully we don't get a feedback loop or anything like that. So, let's go on now to an article in the Denver Post. This is a story near and dear to my heart. This is, of course, right on the featured image is of the state capitol, which is about, 15, 20 minutes from my house. Denver District Court judge dismisses lawsuit on Colorado red flag gun law. So another red flag gun law issue, right? And there's a couple of challenges actually going up against this one here in Colorado. This particular challenge is an interesting one and honestly a bit of a long shot. This is where several House Republicans, specifically Minority Leader Patrick Neville, Representative Lori Sane, and Representative Dave Williams, they all sued the state, the governor, Polis, over this bill, they claimed that they violated the House's or the Constitution's requirements for the House to read the bill in its entirety when it was being considered. The only exception is if unanimously the House members all say, no, we don't need to read the whole bill. Let's go ahead and vote on it. They claim that they wanted it to be read, but that it was denied. What it comes down to is this Denver district judge basically said, well, I looked over the case and, you guys are bickering about how the House went about its procedures. He didn't see that there was a violation of the Constitution, and he dismissed it. That's basically what it comes down to. So it was a interesting. Like normally we see challenges against laws like these based around constitutional, at least U.S. constitutional issues, Second Amendment issues, maybe due process issues, that sort of thing. This was more of a procedural issue that is required. It's written into the Constitution. But there was disagreement as to how that went about. So anyway, the point is this particular challenge against the Colorado red flag law did not succeed.
Yep. So it wasn't actually a challenge to the law itself, just a procedural thing.
That's right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. They weren't claiming it was a Second Amendment thing or anything like that. Just straight up, the state constitution was violated in the procedure of. They claim that it was not a unanimous decision to forego the full reading of the bill, and by law it's supposed to be read in its entirety when it's requested. Is my understanding.
Right.
So. On our way now to Massachusetts, opposite side of the country. Massachusetts gun laws challenge could become a Second Amendment Supreme Court blockbuster is the title of this article, according to WBUR.org. Matthew, tell us what's going on in Massachusetts.
Yeah, so it's not a surprise. Massachusetts is one of the most heavily regulated states in the country. We typically think of New York and California, but Massachusetts has some of the most oppressive gun laws. And so this article kind of focuses and says, that may be kind of the point where because they are so oppressive that might, these cases that are popping up may be the ones that actually are taken up by the Supreme Court. If you guys have obviously know of the Heller decision, right? It's super important. DC versus Heller. That was actually back in 2008. And so in the last 12 years, there haven't been any big cases involving, the individual right to carry a firearm outside of your home for personal protection and whatnot. So all these states are challenging, setting up laws, and then there's appeals and all kinds of things. So we thought that the Supreme Court was going to take up that New York Rifle Association versus State of New York case, but they didn't, and we were all like, oh boy, this same old song and dance. But one thing that this article mentions in that statement that Kavanaugh made, he said that they were dropping. He agreed with not pursuing the case because the law had been repealed, and so therefore, there was no standing, and the point was moot. But he said that the court should address that issue very soon, or soon. That's quote. The court should address that issue soon. So obviously, it's on his mind, and they are more probably pro-gun. We would expect, or more constitutionally protection of the Second Amendment. In a couple of the cases they mentioned is the challenge to Massachusetts public carry law, and that is basically a may issue type situation where you have to show good cause in order to get a concealed carry license in Massachusetts. So, you pass all the background checks, you're totally legit, you've never committed a crime in your life, and you want to pay your money, you want to get training, you do all that, you go in front of, and you say, I'd like to get a permit, and they say, why? And you say, well, because I want to protect myself. And they say, that's not a good enough answer. you have to show good cause. So what more do you need to show that other than I want to be able to protect my life? They'll in California it's similar. I know people that had to fill out like, I'm a business owner and I transport money and things and that. And it's crazy because if you think about it, they're saying your life isn't worth enough on its own to protect, but if you're carrying money or valuables or you have to work in a bad area, then it's okay. So it's ridiculous, right? And so that's one of the laws. And the other one they're talking about is the assault rifle ban and the ammunition ban in Massachusetts. So they said they noted these two cases specifically that may be taken up in the future by the Supreme Court and could have dramatic effect on a lot of these other laws across the country.
Yeah. Massachusetts is a state that issues what they call a license to carry, kind of like Texas, where if you have a license to carry, it applies both concealed and openly. You have to actually have that license to carry openly in Texas, which I've found that to be rather odd. Of course, it wasn't that many years ago that you couldn't actually openly carry in Texas. So anyway, that's beside the point. Massachusetts is a lot more difficult to get a permit in. Mm-hmm. And so that is the issue here, because there's no good or predictable or common means for getting the license that's required for you to carry a gun in public, period.
Yeah, it's totally subjective.
Yeah, so agreed that this is a case that needs to be picked up. And I think, there was a little bit of a stink raised over Kavanaugh not going along with the dissenting opinion in its entirety with the that New York case. Mm-hmm. I think if you read through what he wrote for as far as his opinion was, hey, they dismissed it. I think on the principle of the matter, Kavanaugh was basically saying, yeah, this law is unjust law. Like I would have sided with my more conservative court members here, but it was dismissed. There's no case here to be made of this. Like, so I go along with the majority opinion. Mm-hmm. But to your point, like you said, he said that the court should address these types of issues here very soon. There's currently 10 cases that are on the Supreme Court's docket that they are looking at considering a bunch of different challenges, and we'll have to watch these things closely. So these Massachusetts ones are involved in that, obviously. There's public carry assault weapon laws. That's the Massachusetts cases. There's I think, let's see, I'm trying to remember. I'm going through my notes here. I thought there was one about magazines, but I might be wrong on that. It might be part of, it's sort of wrapped into the whole assault weapons and also high capacity magazines. Sort of like there's a case that deals with both of those. So it'll be interesting to see what they do here. I'm apprehensive because of recent rulings or failures to rule on some of these issues, these Second Amendment issues. But I hope that there could be another kind of landmark case similar to Heller that is broader than Heller, because Heller is it's a defined scope that's relatively narrow. It's a big precedent and it helps in a lot of ways, but it wasn't the end all be all for all Second Amendment rights issues. So it'll be interesting to see if we get a ruling in the near future that expands upon Heller and takes it kind of the next level. So yeah, we'll keep and that's right, Mark is talking about the Roster case out of California. So yeah, it's a tough one, where you're in a state where basically you can't buy anything that's you can't buy any of these new guns that come to market because none of them are number one, they have to go through the process of ending up on California's roster, and then to get on the roster, they got to meet all these new stringent requirements to get on there. Even things like as simple as a manual safety, and a lot of these new gun models you see come out don't initially come out with one, and all kinds of crazy stuff there out in California. So I'd love to see that roster business just get totally shut down. So stay tuned for these cases at the Supreme Court. We'll see if they take any of these up and what comes of them. Yep. Out of, this is newschannel9.com, Atlanta, Georgia. The judge, it says here, won't suspend Georgia handgun carry law during virus emergency. Basically what you have here is Governor Kemp in Georgia has refused to grant a suspension on requirement for permits to, say, carry a gun concealed. I believe open carry is legal to do in Georgia, but to carry concealed it requires a permit, and it's not a very high standard honestly to get a permit in Georgia, but you still have to go through the application process. And what the state of Georgia has done here has shut down what they consider to be everything other than essential services, and processing concealed carry permits or licenses is not an essential service. Is basically what they're saying, what the governor of Georgia is saying. So a couple of challenges to that have been put forth. GeorgiaCarry.org, a gun rights organization in Georgia, has filed a couple. I think they're on their third filing now, challenging these various, mostly COVID-19 related restrictions. This most recent, the most recent one to have gotten to the judge and to be ruled on, the judge declined to suspend the law on this issue. And it's a fair point that GeorgiaCarry.org raises, right? Well, do we or don't we have a right to possess and carry a gun with us in some fashion, right? And of course, I don't think Governor Kemp gives a crap. I think there is no right. I think you have to ask permission to carry that gun. So I imagine there are those, Matthew, that are unable to obtain their legal papers, their permits to carry their guns concealed, that are probably just doing so anyway. It'd be interesting if somebody got caught, and that could really turn into an interesting case, especially where this was a temporary closure of these government services.
Yeah, I mean, imagine somebody. I mean, here's the thing. I think that this type of thing is punitive. Totally. It's just I don't like guns, and therefore I'm going to punish gun owners. It has nothing to do with public safety, right? I mean, this is just it's just bizarre to me that people think that this has anything to do with public safety. It has nothing. I mean, you think about all the people that purchased firearms, new firearm owners, and want to go out and train, and they shut down ranges, and I know I couldn't teach classes for a while and things like that, and it's like it's antithetical to the idea of, we want everybody to be safe with guns. We don't mind guns. We just want people to be safe, but we're not going to allow you to train, and we're not going to allow you to or legal channels to or legally, right? And so it's just, I mean, imagine you have a restraining order against somebody, and you want to go get a firearm, and you want to carry it concealed, and you can't, and then you end up getting killed by that person that you had a restraining order against. And if there was some sort of documentation that showed that this person, guy or girl, whatever, went and wanted to get a restraining order but couldn't, because it's not essential, I think that would be horrible. And so it's not about safety, I don't think, not in my mind. But I'm not the governor.
You're absolutely right.
So.
I mean, one interesting thing is that in most states it takes up to 90 days to process permits for concealed carry, and this sort of thing where it's not like by shutting down permit processing they're keeping anybody from actually getting a permit, at least in the short term, but that's beside the point. That really shouldn't matter. And I know that's one answer I heard. There was some talk here in Colorado with some similar issues, and it's like, well, this is not an emergency situation as far as getting a permit. And it's like, well, that's not always the case, because there is a provision here in Colorado that a sheriff can issue a provisional permit in emergency situations. And my understanding is they're not in some counties even processing those. And that's really concerning to me, because if you have a situation where someone has a legitimate, identifiable, reasonable threat that they are aware of that causes them to go purchase a gun, hopefully get some training, but they feel a need to carry that gun with them immediately because their life is immediately potentially in danger. And a lot of times we're talking about serious domestic violence type cases, abuse cases, stuff like that, where the person's been able to get out of that situation, and but they're concerned for their safety, and legitimately so, because we know how that stuff goes sometimes. And again, there's a provision that would allow a sheriff to look at a situation, go, okay, we'll run an initial quick check on you. Okay, everything comes back clean. Here's a provisional permit while we process your full, complete permit over the next 90 days. And, in some cases you can't even get that now. So I would say that it is a relevant, immediate infringement on people's rights, right to protection, right to self-defense. So that would be what I have to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
And also another story here that highlights how GeorgiaCarry.org, they've been leading the charge in a big way here. And as of Monday morning, May 4th, they filed their third lawsuit against Governor Kemp in the state of Georgia. So just they're doing everything they can. They keep finding more and more of these cases, because in one of the cases it was one lady, I forgot her name already. In this case, it's some other person entirely, and basically they're finding these individuals that are prohibited from being able to carry and protect themselves, and then they're teaming up basically with that person and leading the charge on filing these lawsuits. So probably likely this one won't get through either, and by the time something does happen or whatever, then a lot of these restrictions, I imagine by that point, will be lifted anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, be vigilant out there, folks, and stay sharp, and don't give up on your rights, even if it is a so-called emergency. ABAjournal.com, interesting story here. This one also out of Massachusetts, and what this was, I feel like maybe we talked about this, maybe not, I don't know. Maybe it was New Jersey, I don't remember. It just feels like last time we had a legislative news episode, we talked about something similar about gun businesses being shut down due to these various governor's orders, right? Mm-hmm. Shutting down non-essential businesses, and classifying what is and what isn't essential, and all this stuff, right? And so in the state of Massachusetts, Governor Charlie Baker shut down non-essential businesses, and that included shutting down gun retailers. And so a challenge came before the courts there, and in that case, a judge ordered reopening of gun stores.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. Thumbs up.
Yeah, I think you were talking about California. I think we talked about a couple of those orders that, gun stores were closing and things like that. But this judge, the federal judge, Douglas Woodlock, pretty cool quote, or a pretty good quote. He says, "We don't surrender our constitutional rights," Woodlock said. "These plaintiffs have constitutional rights that deserve respect and vindication, and it becomes necessary for a court to do that rather than the executive when the executive declines." So Governor Charlie Baker shuts it down, won't hear anything, won't open it up. And so he's saying we have to intervene because these constitutional rights are being stripped. It's a violation, right? And so he puts an injunction, which is pretty cool. But and then he says, reasonably, he says, okay, well, we want you to, gun stores make sales by appointment, no more than 4 people, or blah blah blah, those types of things. But a straight outright closure, enforced closure is totally bogus and totally, at least in this federal judge's mind, unconstitutional, or he wouldn't have stepped in.
Well, I know that one thing that we're seeing too, just all across the nation, is, and not just on the issue of guns or gun rights, but all kinds of legal challenges are beginning to surface over a lot of this shutdown. I mean, we've never shut down our country economically, financially, all this stuff. We've never done it on this level, on this scale, for this long a time too. It's really an unprecedented time, and I don't want to get too much into the politics of all that, but we haven't seen the end of it either. I don't think. I think there's going to be more challenges and maybe things that come after the fact. Even people making claims about how their lives were destroyed, businesses shuttered, and money lost because they were forced to shut down, and there's real losses that have resulted because of that. So anyway, it's good to see at least one thing swung, I think, the right direction in this case, with the judge ordering reopening of gun stores. Too bad that the judge in Georgia couldn't figure things out with regards to, it really isn't a big deal to temporarily let people just carry their guns. Like, geez, we should have constitutional carry anyway. That's my stance nationwide.
Agreed.
One final thing. This is a bonus. And not gonna, we're not gonna play it or anything as part of the podcast here today, but bringing to your attention quite an interesting video that the NRA put together, and this one features B.J. Baldwin, who we actually talked about in our most recent Justified Saves podcast episode. The first Tuesday of each month, we do the Justified Saves episodes, where we feature all these civilian uses of justified deadly force all across the country. And this is one that was featured in that. And this is quite a remarkable story where BJ and his girlfriend, Tori, also a prominent individual in the 2A community, a former pro shooter with Glock, that's Tori Nonaka. BJ Baldwin and Tori are a thing now, and they were grabbing a bite to eat, he said, after a long day. Stopped in at this In-N-Out Burger, and it sounded like they, probably went to the drive-thru, or they ordered and picked it up or whatever, but they're hanging out there basically in the parking lot area, sitting down, eating. And they're approached by two individuals, one of which was armed with a gun and pointed that gun at Tori, and then pointed it at BJ, and then pointed it back at Tori, and apparently fired 2 shots at her, and then turned and fired 6 shots at BJ. But by the time that BJ basically points out that he knew it was time to go, when the gun went back from him back to his girlfriend, BJ drew his gun and put 10 shots on the bad guy. And in this video, it's a humbling video for sure. I mean, it's fascinating too at the same time. He was prepared. He was prepared that day. He was carrying his gun. He's trained. They feature some video of him shooting, and he obviously has skills. I mean, he's putting rounds on target at a pretty good clip, and that's better than a lot of people can honestly say about themselves. And he says very clearly he put 9 rounds into the chest, and then 1 round that ended it into, as he described, the central nervous system, a headshot. So we'll include the link to this video. You can go check it out. It's on YouTube. And I think you'll enjoy watching and learning about this experience that BJ had that we just talked about on the podcast a few weeks ago.
Yeah. And if you're kind of like not a big fan of the NRA, typical NRA commercials, I think this is a pretty good one. Kind of strays from the typical script. It is a little bit political in nature, but the NRA,
towards the end.
They're a political lobbying group, right? Like, they're, in addition to gun rights, like they're not. So they interject some politics into it, but it's a pretty good well put together ad.
Yep. It really is. It's a compelling video to watch because the story's compelling. It's real. It's true. It's also recent and relevant. And I think the only reason he was comfortable coming out and telling the story like this openly so soon is because it was investigated, and the DA there came right out and said there was no foul here in the actions of BJ. That was purely a self-defense situation. And even the brother of the man that was shot and killed, it was the one man that was wielding the gun. And his brother, there's some stories out there, interviews with him. He seems to kind of imply that, well, I wasn't really, I didn't agree with what was going down. I just was kind of along for the ride, but it doesn't really matter. But the brother also asked that no charges be filed against BJ. So kind of interesting that you actually have, the dead man's brother, right, actually come out that openly and say, no, there should be no, my brother, hey, I know we screwed up. He screwed up. BJ did the right, he did the thing. He did what he had to do. So it's a compelling story, and really, really quite remarkable. And I think it's a testament too, because BJ really touches on this fact that he was prepared, that he was carrying, that he was permitted, but also that he'd been, he trained, and he spends time practicing and taking training courses and stuff to shoot defensively. So that's a really cool thing to see. I think it's a positive message, notwithstanding the political twist it takes at the end of the video. But regardless of that, the story itself is a great story, and there's stuff that can be learned from that.
Yep, for sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Of course, you'll recall I remember we talked about that and talked about the fact that he fired 10 shots, and for some guns, a lot of you folks, the guns you carry, if this was you, and by the way, he made it pretty clear that last shot was the one that really, truly, completely ended it. So that 10th shot was a headshot, not an easy one to make. Yeah. If you're carrying a shield with 8 rounds or something, like you didn't make it to the end of this gunfight, potentially.
Yeah, it's something to think about for sure.
Yeah.
And one other thing in the interview, and I didn't know this fact until I saw the little interview, but he identified those guys about, he says 80 yards away. That's a long distance to identify somebody with a firearm, and he said they were closing the distance fast, and so. I think sometimes we think that these things are always right up, up close and personal, but luckily or thankfully they had some situational awareness to be able to pick this threat up, at 80 yards and gave them some time to formulate like, hey, I'm going to move here. I can, it probably was a more defining or important factor in them surviving more so than his individual skills. I would say. So that's something to think about.
It's a great point. It's being tuned in, being aware of your surroundings. The fact that you took notice, right? That's huge. And having those seconds to kind of prepare and go, something looks a little off here. And he mentioned how it took Tori kind of, she kind of got his attention too a little bit, like BJ. She said his name several times, kind of in a whisper, trying to get his attention too. Like I think he had noticed, but then she, I think, was the one that probably first noticed that there was a gun present. And then from there, the rest of the history. And sounded like a lot of the shooting, it just didn't occur at 80 yards away. It was more like 15 yards.
Right.
And I don't want to try to assume too much, but it kind of looks like BJ's, the gun he's shooting and that they feature in the gun in the video while he's shooting, looks like some kind of Glock with a red dot on it. And I just was thinking, it'd be interesting to pick his brain a little bit about that, as far as whether he felt, particularly if he had a shootout at 15 yards and making that headshot, if that played into it at all. Having that confidence level, if you will, or knowing that he could make that kind of shot, that's what I see, is that a red dot at 15 yards on a headshot, that is a game changer. Whether I take that shot at 15 yards with iron sights in lower light conditions, I might not take that shot. But if I have a little more confidence in my equipment, because it's a little bit easier with that dot at that kind of, that's where red dot just really truly shines, is making more precise shots at distance with a very imprecise, small, short range weapon like a pistol. So I don't know, interesting, something to think about.
Sure.
Lately I've been carrying a dot more and more, and I like shooting it. I've been familiarizing myself with it more and more. I've been shooting competitively with a red dot for a couple years, couple seasons now, and doing it more and more. So I think it's probably not far off before I make that complete transition and only carry a dot for the most part.
Yeah.
So, what about you, Matthew? I know this is kind of the end here of the show, but I'm just curious, like where you're at with that. I know you've got a couple guns, or you at least got one gun with a dot on it.
Both now, actually. I see it so much better. Plus, I'm only 44, but for whatever reason, my eyes. I had LASIK done a long time ago, and I don't know if that has anything, but I have difficulty at times picking up my sights at different planes, and I don't wear reading glasses and things like that. It's really, sometimes up close, I can't really see the sights as well. And so the dot really for me just makes it so much easier to target focus and just, have a dot there and not have to really worry about, hey, I can see this plane pretty decently, but when it's here, it's a little blurry. And then, so for me, it just kind of simplifies it, and it just made it a lot easier for me.
Yeah, agreed. Good stuff, man. Well, folks, that's a wrap for today's episode, the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode 418. Legislative news we covered. I hope that it was helpful for you to hear about these things and know those things that you should be aware of and following and fighting for as far as your rights are concerned. Today's episode is sponsored by LaserX training software, dry fire training software. You can find it at laserapp.com, LASRAPP.com. And also Next Level Training's CERT pistols. You can check those out, concealedcarry.com/CERT, SIRT. And also AmmoSupplyWarehouse.com. Thanks for listening and or viewing, folks. We appreciate you all. We'll be back here next week with more great coverage from the Concealed Carry Podcast and the team here. Maybe we'll get Jacob back on. Today he just was, I actually invited Jacob. I said, hey, you got time to do the podcast today? And unfortunately he had some things he had to take care of, and that's the way it goes. And so we got stuck with Graybeard. But, but guys, we'll be back here next week. And until then, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care. Thank you, everyone, on Facebook and YouTube. Appreciate your comments, and you guys are a great crew. So glad you enjoyed the show, Sean. Ben, I saw, too, that you apparently you posted you've been furloughed, so I hope that gets resolved very quickly for you. So sorry about that. And for anybody else that's having employment challenges or financial difficulties at this time, my prayers be for all of you. In fact, my family prays every night for those in our country here, our community, our families that are affected with COVID-19, whether it's financially or actually physically. So hope you guys are all doing great. All right. So we will sign on out of here. Take care, and we'll see you next time.